another Unqualified Opinions by Masari. I am your host, Ryan Selkis, at 2BitIdiot on Twitter. Feel free to jump in with questions if I can field them. Really excited about the conversation today with Monica Quaintance, who's the head of research and networks at Cadena. Cadena's got a big Q4 coming up with some product launches and going from testnet to mainnet to token distribution and everything in between. Has a pretty cool partnership with Cosmos that we're going to talk a little bit about. But I think first and foremost, we should probably just get to the elephant in the room, which is how many smart contract platforms do we actually need in this industry? And maybe talk a little bit about just how you got on this wild ride. So both, kind of personal evolution into crypto and kind of what led us to this moment now. And then I'm sure we're going to spend most of the conversation going down the rabbit hole in Cadena. But first, Monica, how are we here? Why are we here? Is too meta maybe for a Monday, but how are we here now? What's new?
I think the answer to how many smart contract platforms we need is we just need one that works. Mm-hmm. But we don't yet have one, which is why I'm here. Mm-hmm. And how I'm here is I was working as a systems engineer, and my friend Will called me up and said, I'm leaving JP Morgan, we're making a smart contract blockchain, do you want to come? And I was like, I've never made blockchain before, but let's do it. It's going to be great. And between all the research that they did, Will and Stu at JP Morgan, mm-hmm. and the work that I did in probability research and distributed systems, we have come up with something that I think is really awesome, and all of our clients so far really seem to love it. And we're taking our smart contract language pact and putting it on top of both a private blockchain and a public blockchain into one single platform. So you can make a single application that uses both private and public blockchain without having to worry about connecting different pieces to each other and this piece of software by this company and this piece of software by this company. It's just a one-stop, one deploy that actually works.
And is this based on the quorum research that JP Morgan did? Where did the dividing line come? Is it basically just, hey, we started with this, because it was built on Hyperledger initially, at least JP Morgan's project, right?
This is sort of a long story, but
is it just a complete rewrite, or is there any, like, what's the evolution from?
So once upon a time, there was a project called Juno.
Mm-hmm.
Juno, Will and Stu made Juno, and they originally submitted it to Hyperledger with the thought that this would become part of the Hyperledger Foundation. Mm-hmm. Hyperledger decided that they didn't want, for whatever reason, and I wasn't there so I can't speculate, but decided that they didn't want to incorporate Juno into their stack. And Will and Stu, they were, through a twist of fate, given the rights to Juno by JP Morgan with the understanding that they would open source it. Mm-hmm. They open sourced Juno and then left JP Morgan. Subsequently, JP Morgan developed an open source, a fork of Ethereum that's designed to be used for private blockchain. So we never worked on Quorum, although there's definitely some, we have a depth of knowledge related to Quorum, and I'm sure that people still call Will all the time asking for help with deploying Quorum, because we are a team that has worked in the private blockchain space for a long time. But all of our work at Cadena is totally from scratch and has nothing to do with Ethereum, has nothing to do with Hyperledger, mm-hmm. has nothing to do with Quorum, totally from scratch.
How do you go about making that decision? I mean, I guess the die is cast a couple of years ago at this point now. Yeah. But certainly now when you see Hashgraph and Solana and ETH 2.0 and Polkadot and Cosmos, all these other platforms that are either being deployed in the next couple of quarters or have already been deployed. How do you think about just the education gap and developing any type of critical mass for developers that want to build on this new stack? Because there's 15 different teams that are saying we want to build a blockchain that works, and we want to build something that's high throughput but it's still secure, right? So first, I'll let you do the marketing spiel. I'm like, okay, why is this actually better? Because it kind of makes
we don't have to do the marketing spiel.
No, you did. All right, I'll keep it at like, all right, 20. You have 20 seconds to do like the marketing bullshit, and then we'll talk about like what I think is the greater challenge of how do you get people to care, right? Just because it's better, you still have to battle these network effects. So first of all, kind of why is it better? And then how are you tackling this, massive on-ramping challenge that you're gonna, and all smart contract platforms will have.
All right, so 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that we think that Kadena is better is because blockchain development should be really easy. It should be really simple.
Mm-hmm.
It should be like AWS for blockchain. You just one click and it works. And you don't have to worry about permissions, and you don't have to worry about who can see my code, who can hack my contracts, who has the right to do these things. And your app, like everybody loves this idea of distributed everything and DeFi everything,
Mm-hmm.
but there's sometimes where you don't want all of your app to be run on a blockchain. You don't want necessarily all of your computation done on a public blockchain, all of your storage on a public blockchain. It's not safe, it's not secure, and it's costly to do storage. Gas is expensive, gas storage is expensive. So private blockchain and public blockchain integrated into a hybrid blockchain with a single, easy, secure smart contract language, we just want it to be easy for people to actually get over the threshold of using blockchain. And this is designed for businesses to use and not designed for hackers, although I'm sure that you can do amazing hackable things with Pact if you really want to. So that's it.
Sorry, I just had this awkward moment, and the listeners that get us on iTunes and Spotify won't know what happened. I just had a pop up on the screen. I want to make sure that this did not crash,
Okay.
which mid-answer. But so is both the private and the public component of Kadena proprietary and something new, or is the goal to ultimately create the public infrastructure that allows any private permission blockchain to be built? Because interconnectivity is obviously, and interoperability is obviously going to be a big theme the next couple of years as people figure out how can I use these various systems, and are there certain protocols that are optimized for my specific use case? If so, where do I ensure that there's security for this? Is there a way to kind of interoperate and plug and play?
So you can think of Kadena, the public blockchain, as kind of a reverse Cosmos hub. Instead of it being a thin layer that allows other blockchains, public blockchains, to communicate with each other, like Cosmos, it's a fat pipe that is a public blockchain that allows you to connect many other private blockchains or public blockchains but the computation can be done on the fat pipe of Kadena as a hub. And so right now we have Kadena, the private blockchain, and we're still coming up with a fancy name for it. For a while it was called Scalable BFT, but that's really hard to pronounce and not great for marketing, so I think we're going to come up with a new name for it. But there's a Kadena private blockchain, and right now that's available on Azure and AWS, and that's also built by us and proprietary. And right now you need a licensing fee to use it, and it's designed for high bandwidth enterprise, like Fortune 500 companies. And that plugs in natively to Kadena Public. And then we also have a project with Tendermint. We're calling Kadena Mint. We got a grant from the Inner Blockchain Foundation. And we put Pact on top of Tendermint. And so that's another way that people can use an open source private blockchain in order to connect to the Kadena.
So what are some of the examples and use cases that you have, I guess, soft circled early on that will either come out shortly after launch or that have been experimented with on the testnet? I assume that there's a certain number of relationships and other parties that have carried over from just the legacy backgrounds that the team has. But where in particular will the focus be? And especially for the next 6 months, I guess. Is there a sector? Is there a specific company?
This dovetails with your question about on-ramping, because the way that we have been approaching adoption for our platform is really focusing on people that have real business use cases that want to build something, but they've struggled with the existing offerings. Like they've tried to use Ethereum, but it was too expensive to run a smart contract, or they couldn't get enough throughput. Or they tried to use Stellar, but realized that there were limitations in what the Stellar platform allows you to do inside of a transaction. And these companies, we've been talking to them and working with them, and they've been testing on the private blockchain, developing their pact code with the intention of launching once the public network is up. For example, we're working with a company called Remedy, which is spelled Rymedi, because they're a startup and they can't spell their name without a fancy spelling.
Or they can't get the trademark.
Right. So they're working on a number of different projects related to either medical devices or like products that you have to register with the government in some form, because that tracking is really powerful when it comes to ascertaining the provenance of where did this product come from, is it safe, has it been tracked, and that kind of information, some of it they don't want necessarily to have all of the information on a public blockchain. Some of it's sensitive patient data, some of it's sensitive information, but they still want to be able to have an oracle to a public blockchain so they can say, this thing was produced here, or this thing made it through these checkpoints, or it was inspected by this person at this time. So hopefully we're going to have a product on shelves by the end of this year that's registered on our blockchain through their project, which is going to be cool. I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you what the product is yet, but...
You can. I don't
You won't tell anybody? Will they tell somebody?
Well, if a tree falls on it. So we need more people to subscribe and make sure that this is breaking news. I'm always fascinated to learn kind of what, if anything, new teams that are coming to market with a token have learned in general, but certainly in recent history, about their rollout plans, and what, if anything, keeps you up at night, aside from the obvious, like, is this shit going to work? Is anyone going to come? For each phase of this rollout. So first of all, let's break down the milestones. So end of this month is
mainnet launch.
And then is there an interim between token distribution?
Right, so when we launch mainnet, it's a mining launch.
Yep.
And we're going to be mining for a month, and this is public mining, so anybody who's interested in mining, join our Discord channel, you'll find out all the information about mining. And then after a month of mining, we're going to turn on transactions. So at that point, you'll be able to actually trade tokens on the network, and that should be around December 1st. And at that point, we consider that to be our full public launch. And we are talking to a token distribution, token sale platform about doing a token sale some point in October or November. So hopefully other people will be able to get their hands on tokens.
So this is an IEO?
It's not an IEO because we're not doing this with an exchange, but we are, the structure of an IEO I like because
so you can go to coinlist.co for the pre-registration.
Yeah, we're working with Coinlist, and it allows us to actually comply with securities regulations, which I'm excited about because it means that we can get tokens into the hands of internationals and US people. We're going to be running multiple different types of security sales, but
how Blockstack obviously has gone the full Reg A Plus route, and we've spoken about some of the challenges of just having like securities holders as your users early on versus people who are just using it for consumptive purposes. I think there's one school of thought or one group that, me included, that has a mental hang-up, but how do you go from a security to a consumptive token, right? So how do you think about designing the early distributions in a way that will ultimately allow this network to be fully decentralized, and you don't have to worry about the reporting requirements because it's just like Ether, and it's gotten too big for it to be governed by the SEC.
Great question, and the answer is we don't know. So we're going to attempt to comply with securities regulations as best as we can. That's
Which is the harsh reality of doing things in the US.
Yeah, it's just the harsh reality of doing things in the United States, but we do believe that, we're US employees and we believe in innovation coming from the United States, and we're going to do our best as much as we can to comply with regulations.
Well, I wish you the best of luck because I think most folks in the U.S., at least privately, are having conversations of should we relocate internationally just to do business. We'll try to play by the rules, but if that is impossible, do we have to move? And it's crazy that people talked about that potentially happening. I'm seeing that more and more, at least behind closed doors. No one wants to say that to the SEC. Because then it gives you the optics of the project. They're like, oh, well, you just don't want to abide by existing laws and regulations. No, we can't functionally operate long term if
it's definitely a difficult balance.
Yeah. So how do you think about distribution in terms of just size and percentages and managing a gradual process, because we've seen other launches recently, won't name names, where it's a fucking disaster, right? Because you have like the early investors that have incentives to sell as quickly as possible. If they see, okay, 10% of the tokens are now liquid, 90% still has to be sold. I'm up 5x. I don't really care if like the more recent investors are break even or going to lose a little bit of money. And we've seen a couple of situations where the price just tanks. And after a certain point, who comes to buy those tokens if everybody's just getting their face ripped off?
Well, call me naive, and you can, but we, are not selling our tokens at a significant premium to the price to be sold to investors. There's no massive investor discount. And the investors that have been with us for the long haul, almost 2 years now for some of them, we chose them because we don't think that they're the kind to do a pump and dump. We hope, fingers crossed, that the investors that we chose, and we chose a very small amount, are with us because they think that we are valuable in the long term. And part of that strategy is we're not launching to a place where we're going to have like a 50x for our initial investors, and I'm hoping that they're going to stick it out with us so that we can see the kind of sustained growth over the long term. We want to be a stable holder.
Do you know what the markup would be, round over round? Or has that not been fully contemplated yet with the project listing?
I don't know what we have decided to do with the listing price, but
because even if it's not 50x, right? There are we see kind of secondary activity, which technically you can't do with SAFs, but people are making giant leaps of faith that they're just going to be able to unwind these IOUs on the OTC market, and you see things like Telegram and Filecoin and other SAFs still trading hands and like markets are being made, but in many cases it's well below the last public sale, and it's not necessarily 10x or even 5x in some cases. So I wonder what type of thinking goes into that as you bring in the new crop of investors, and this one would be much wider, right? If you're going through CoinList or doing an IEO or anything, the goal is to we've hit these milestones. We have the main net. We want to bring as many people into the fold as possible now.
Wider distribution.
That first, or maybe not the first, but that next group and that kind of first public cohort, it almost feels like it's more important than getting the really private investors, right?
It could be, and I don't know what the right answer is in terms of finding who those people are, but I'm hoping that it's going to be the people that have been following us all along, that they've been waiting for us to release to the point where this is publicly available, and that it's not just going to be people that see us on some Telegram list of things to buy, but rather they actually believe in the future of the project.
How do you think about, so this is a different spin on my first question, right? There's dozens of smart contract platforms now. We talked about just mind share in general. How do you navigate the fundraising process when it seems like many people are just totally gassed and like fatigued from like 2007 ICO fever. And now you've also got the dynamic of, okay, well, if this is a security, and I'm signing up for a registration process or some exemption that CoinList manages, how do these new wave of investors feel about that? And is there really a market for that, or is most of the retail, is most of the market still split between retail speculators that are going to use some offshore exchange and professional funds that are going to just buy and hold and wait for several years? I'm trying to figure out like what that middle market looks like, because I haven't seen it, but obviously you all are bullish on existing.
Well, we're also not necessarily looking to do, the goal of this sale is to get tokens into the hands of people who want to provide some additional market liquidity and want to experiment with the platform. It's probably going to be in the realm of like 5 to 10 million. It's not like,
Which is a percentage is what is this, how does supply dynamics work?
So the total supply of the market at 120 years, we mine out like Bitcoin, is 1 billion tokens. But that doesn't happen until long after we're all gone. The 10-year mark is 500 million tokens, and the 5-year mark is 300 million tokens. So selling 5 million, and the first year it's like something around 25 to 30 million tokens mined out in the first year. So we're selling a bare fraction of what we expect to see coming out in the first 5 years.
And how much is to be mined then? So walk through the mining.
70% mine out over the total network over all time. And the remainder is held in a lockup, in a trust. And all of that is going to be codified into the smart contract that generates all of the tokens for the platform. So anybody can go and see that we're not going to like smash and grab and run away with the tokens, that they're actually held in a lockup. That's formalized.
Remind me, how's mining done?
Mining is done like Bitcoin, just straight mining. We're using a form of Blake as our mining algorithm.
So it is fully proof of work.
Fully proof of work.
And this can be done on GPUs, so for the foreseeable future anyway.
Right.
If you ever have an ASIC problem, that will be mission accomplished, right?
Right. If we have an ASIC problem, it'll be a great development for the network.
Yes, exactly. So I guess news just came out this morning about the Crypto Ratings Council.
What is the crypto? Sorry, I haven't been watching the news.
Which Coinbase and Circle and Bittrex and several of the other U.S. exchanges and major crypto financial companies have seemed to back, where they're trying to come up with a rating score based on how likely it is something will be deemed to be a security.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and they have a 1 to 5 score, 1 being not a chance, that would be Bitcoin, and 5 being is definitely a security. Right? And I think Ripple was like a 4 or something like that, and then Bitcoin was a 1. So those are your parameters. And I can't remember who they kind of singled out as like, these are clearly securities. I think it might have been like Maker and Polymath or something. How would you think about like your own rubric for today? This is a, first of all, should this, even though you're registering it under SEC exemptions, or sorry, not registering it, but you're completing this fundraise under certain SEC exemptions, so you're basically saying this is going to be treated like a security, at least for the short haul. Where do you think you fit today, even if you did?
Sale is going to be treated as security because we have not yet launched the network.
Okay.
And we are aiming to be as Bitcoin-like as humanly possible.
Okay.
And trying to abide.
So this will be the last one, and everything else is supposed to go to miners, at least in theory.
In theory, this should be the last sale that we need to register, because when we launch the network, the goal is to be completely decentralized, that all code changes have to go through miners, that everybody has to accept that this is what a distributed mining pool looks like. We're aiming to have projects actually using the platform, that it's not just speculative currency trading, that it's actually something that people are actively using for something. This is why we've been so careful to try to make sure that we have products that are launching on the platform as soon as possible. and global token holdings, global token distribution. That's not just, we made a thing in order to make money off of it. We've been very careful to try to be as how we test compliant as possible. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be as Bitcoin-like as possible.
So you'd say on the day one, you're not even going to go into the numerical scale, but how do you get closer to a 1 versus a, if XRP is only a 4, we'll give you guys a 4, right? So we'll cascade down from there. What are key milestones that you think about in making this less and less security-like over time? So, I mean, at some point, maybe even the Cadena, is it the Cadena Foundation or Cadena Inc.?
There will be a foundation.
Okay.
Once upon a time. I'm not sure.
But there will also be a company as
yes,
well?
There will
okay.
also be.
So the goal is not to just discontinue those over time or kind of phase them out, that these will be going concerns for the remaining foreseeable future.
Well, nobody knows how you get from Ethereum started to the SEC decided that Ethereum wasn't a security.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Nobody knows how to navigate those gray waters, and so we're trying to do the best that we can. And the things that I think about when we think about are you a security or are you not a security, it's, does the benefit clearly accrue back to the people who made what you're making? How much are they in control of the future of this project? And if Vitalik says this is what's going to happen, is that what actually happens, or do miners actually have to come to some sort of consensus?
Mm-hmm.
And is what you've made actually useful for something, or are people just using it to speculate on value?
That's all that we've talked about pretty much in this conversation, and I'm sure you probably secretly hate me a bit inside. But this is kind of
a little bit.
This
and
is
not that secret.
all right. So yes, exactly. So you're good about that. I do think it's important. We're kind of in a.
What do you think about when you think about securities tests?
I think that the SEC tries very hard, and not in a productive manner. So it doesn't really matter, I guess. So the reason. I think we as a company track a lot of this information, which is obviously why we're talking about it. The industry also is just kind of in a period of where the infrastructure is being built, and one criticism I think that internally and externally is pretty common is are people just building solutions to problems that don't exist? So it's almost like everybody's building in anticipation that the next app will come, right? If you build it, it will come because we saw some of this activity in 2017, but we knew that a lot of what was getting built wasn't going to be sustainable to trade or build an ecosystem around because we just weren't there yet. This has been the infrastructure build. Now you've got this next cycle of the chicken and the egg problem, of how does this actually become interesting and useful beyond just speculation. So we'll talk a little bit about that because maybe we've already lost everybody. Look, I don't want to talk about securities and shit. So what do you think about? You talk about user education and getting people just knowledgeable about how this particular stack works. How do you, as a single project, or kind of us as an ecosystem, think about leveling up third-party developers and getting them excited to build something on any crypto protocol right now? Let's just start there. Forget about the battle between ETH 2.0 and Ethereum. They have all the mind share right now. Polkadot and Cosmos came out. They've got a little bit of mind share, and then kind of everybody else is trying to follow suit and do the same. But almost none of them have real tinkerers yet because they're not live. How do you even go from 0 to 1 in a bear market that has been persistent and shows no clear end in sight? Not to be a complete downer. This is what you're up against. Good luck.
Our focus has been on companies that have a vision on something they want to create, companies that share our vision of what we think Cadena could be, what we think blockchain could be. And for example, one of them is a company that originally did the first oil ETFs in the early 2000s. It's a company called USCF. And USCF wants to make a brand new type of tradable asset on the blockchain. And so we've gone to the SEC with them and talked to the SEC about how the structure would work and what it would look like on our platform. And we hope that in Q1 or Q2 of next year, we will be able to trade a traditional asset on the Cadena blockchain through USCF. And they understand the power of transformative technology because once upon a time they made the first ever exchange tradable fund for a traditional asset. And so Remedy understands the potential for transformative technology. My dream with Remedy is that someday we can actually have patient data on the private blockchain that you can then have some sort of authorization to transmit it to a doctor or transmit it to a hospital, and that you as a person can actually own your own healthcare data, which is something that can only happen on a private blockchain that allows you to go back and modify smart contracts, which, as far as I know, we're the only ones who let you do that right now.
Yeah, and that's an important point because this, patient data is a perfect example, but even in financial data, right, most enterprises don't want their stuff getting traced by like a Chainalysis or equivalent. Right?
Yeah.
You have certain privacy policies in place. You've got certain issues around just trade secrets and maintaining confidentiality, where it kind of becomes possible to use crypto protocols, blockchain protocols for anything other than settlements and security and interoperability. So I buy that.
There's definitely a power in public blockchain and the ability to have cross-border payments and instant settlements and being able to have reach into new markets. But there's also a danger there that you're opening yourself to risk, you're opening yourself to scrutiny, and you really don't want that kind of risk in a real business. And so this hybrid of private and public blockchain, that's what when we go out to businesses, we say, look, you've heard about blockchain, but you've never seen a blockchain like this. So I've spent a lot of time talking to businesses, traditional businesses that have an interest in branching out into new technology, or technology companies that are interested in moving into a new business sphere, and less time just talking to app developers because they often, even though they love our tech, don't necessarily have a clear idea of what they want to do with it. I'd much rather talk to somebody who has a project and then we can give them the tools to make it happen.
Makes sense. Well, we haven't seen it in a while either yet. Nor has anybody, but that's coming very soon, which is why we're having a conversation.
Only because you haven't downloaded our private blockchain, which has all of the features that you can do on the public blockchain.
Well, I see. I'm still looking for a use case, right? So, here lies the problem for at least us as a company. So, if people want to get involved, how can they reach you? How can they start tinkering around with the testnet in anticipation of launch this month?
So you can go to pact.cadena.io if you want to download all of our tools.
And that's
PACT. And the Discord channel has everybody, all the developers. I'm there, Will is occasionally there. And mid-November, we should be coming out with a new version of our desktop wallet, which is also basically an IDE for developers to go in and be able to manipulate things. And we should have a few games coming out on testnet soon, within the next couple months or so that people can actually go in and start to mess around and see what we can do with the platform.
Monica, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Brian.
And for putting up with me, as all of my guests, for better or for worse, have to do. So check out Cadena. This is Monica Acquaintance, and follow her on Twitter, QuaintM. And follow Cadena at Cadena_IO. Keep an eye out for all their new developments coming up the next few weeks here. Are you going to be at DEF CON?
I'm going to be at DEF CON.
And you can see the team at DEF CON, and including me and some of the Sorry team as well. We'll be wearing our big white t-shirts. So until next time, thanks again for tuning in. Peace.